In the middle of a thunderstorm, my wife Karen shoved me out the front door of the house I had lived in for 20 years.
Or risk being
Get
left
out,
behind forever.
she screamed
There comes
over
a
the
time
thunder.
when silence
I'm
is
done
no
supporting
longer an
you.
option.
I do not
We
need a
must
useless,
address the
broke
issues
old man
before us
draining
with
my
clarity
resources.
and purpose.
I didn't
The truth
say
is,
anything.
we spend so
I
much
just
time
looked at
looking
her with
outward,
sad,
we
tired
forget to
eyes
examine
and said
what lies
quietly,
within.
Karen,
That
you
is
have
where the real
absolutely no
answers are
idea
found.
what you've just done.
Most people live
I
their
turned
entire
and walked
lives
into the
bound by
downpour with nothing
limitations
but
they
the clothes
themselves
on my
create.
back. 3
But
hours
true
later,
freedom lies
her phone
elsewhere.
rang.
Look
It was the
closely
chief
at
of
the world
police,
around you.
and his voice
Everything
was
is
shaking with
changing,
genuine terror.
and we must adapt
Ma'am,
or
he
risk
stammered.
being left behind
Did you
forever.
just evict
There
Thomas
comes a
Harrington?
time when silence
know
is
what
no
you've
longer
done?
an option.
Before I
We
tell you
must
the
address
terrifying
the
secret
issues
I was
before
hiding
us with
that
clarity
made a
and
convoy
purpose.
of black
The truth
SUVs
is,
surround the
we
house
spend
in
so
the
much
middle of the
time
night.
looking outward,
Hit
we
like and
forget to
subscribe,
examine what
and
lies
let me know
within.
in the comments where you
That
are
is
watching
where the
my
real
story
answers
from.
are found.
My name
Most
is
people
Thomas,
live their
and
entire
for the last
lives
15
bound by
years,
limitations
I've
they
lived a very
themselves
quiet
create.
life. I tend
But
to my
true
garden,
freedom
I
lies
read history
elsewhere.
books, and I never talk about my past. My younger wife, Karen, saw this quietness as weakness. She saw me as a boring nobody who was just taking up space in her house while she planned a future with her new boyfriend. The night of the storm, the tension broke. The rain was hammering against the windows, matching the fury in Karen's voice. She had been drinking. She wanted me gone so her boyfriend could move in the next day. She grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin, and physically dragged me to the door. The wind howled as she threw it open. "Leave, Thomas. Go find a gutter to sleep in," she shrieked. I stood there in the freezing rain, water dripping off my gray hair. I could have stopped her. I could have done a lot of things. But I simply asked, "Are you sure about this, Karen?" She slam-locked the deadbolt in my face and went back to her wine, celebrating her freedom. I stood on the porch for a moment, the icy water instantly soaking through my thin cardigan. The wood of the door, which I had sanded and stained myself 10 years ago, felt like a barrier between two worlds. Inside, there was warmth, light, and the woman I had once loved. Outside, there was only the storm and the darkness. I didn't bang on the door. I didn't beg. That isn't who I am. Instead, I turned around and walked down the driveway. My old joints protested the cold, aching with a familiar throb that reminded me of injuries from a lifetime ago. Injuries Karen knew nothing about. She thought my limp was just arthritis, a symptom of aging. She didn't know it was from a shrapnel wound in a place that didn't technically exist on any map. As I reached the sidewalk, the streetlights flickered overhead, struggling against the wind. The rain was blinding. I had no phone. She had kept it, claiming she paid the bill so it belonged to her. I had no wallet. It was on the kitchen counter. I had nothing but my life, which, according to Karen, was worth nothing. I began the long walk toward town. It was 3 miles to the nearest shelter. Every step was a battle against the wind. As I walked, my mind drifted back to the beginning. I met Karen 15 years ago. I was 55, already retired from my government job, and looking for peace. She was 35, vibrant, and seemed kind. I thought I had found a companion to share my twilight years with. I didn't tell her about my past. I couldn't. The Official Secrets Act isn't a suggestion. It's a binding contract for life. To her, I was Thomas Harrington, a retired logistics consultant with a modest pension. For the first few years, it was good, but as I got older, and the excitement of the honeymoon phase faded, Karen changed. Or maybe she just revealed who she always was. She grew resentful of my silence, my frugality, my lack of ambition. She wanted trips to Paris, new cars, fancy dinners. I wanted a quiet garden and safety. She started calling me boring, then useless, then a burden. She didn't know that my frugality was a cover. She didn't know that the modest pension was a fabrication to keep a low profile, and she certainly didn't know that the reason I never wanted to travel abroad wasn't because I was cheap, but because there were still people in very dangerous parts of the world who had a bounty on my head. I needed to stay invisible. By kicking me out, Karen hadn't just made me homeless. She had pushed me out of the shadows and into the light. She had broken the seal of my protection. The wind picked up, nearly knocking me over. I shivered violently. I needed to get indoors. My cover was blown the moment I stepped off that property, but survival was the immediate priority. I finally saw the lights of the town center. The police station was closer than the shelter. I decided to go there. Not to report her. I had no interest in domestic squabbles, but because I knew the protocol, if I was out in the open, I was a liability. I needed to check in. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the precinct. The warmth hit me like a physical blow. I was dripping wet, shaking, looking every bit the useless old man Karen despised. There was a young officer at the front desk, typing on a computer. He looked up, his eyes scanning me with a mix of pity and annoyance. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, his voice flat. He probably saw a dozen old drifters like me every week. "I need to come in out of the cold," I said, my voice rasping, "and I need to make a phone call." "This isn't a hotel, Pop," the officer said, gesturing to the door. "Shelter is 2 blocks down. We can't have loitering here." I took a deep breath. I really didn't want to do this. I wanted to be tending my roses.
Look closely at
I
the
wanted
world
to be
around
reading
you.
about the Roman Empire.
Everything is changing,
but I had no
and we
choice.
must adapt
"Officer,"
or
I
risk
said,
being left
straightening my
behind
back.
forever.
Despite
There
my
comes a
soaked
time
clothes
when
and shivering
silence is
frame,
no longer an
my
option.
voice shifted.
We
The
must
wobble of
address
old
the
age
issues
vanished,
before us with
replaced by a
clarity
tone of
and
command I
purpose.
hadn't used
The
in 2
truth
decades.
is, we spend
I
so
am
much
not
time
asking
looking
for a favor.
outward, we forget
I am
to examine
initiating a
what lies
Protocol
within.
7 check-in.
That
The
is where
officer
the real
paused,
answers are
his
found.
fingers hovering
Most
over the
people
keyboard.
live their entire
He looked
lives
at me,
bound by
really looked at me.
limitations they
For the first
themselves
time,
create.
he laughed nervously.
But true freedom lies
"Protocol what?"
elsewhere. Look
"Look,
closely
buddy,
at the world
you need
around
to
you.
leave." "Type it
Everything
in,"
is changing,
I said
and
softly.
we must
Last
adapt
name,
or risk
Harrington.
being left behind
First name,
forever.
Thomas.
There comes a time when
Authorization
silence is
code,
no longer an
Zulu
option.
X-Ray 99.
We must address
The
the
officer
issues
sighed,
before us
rolling
with
his eyes.
clarity and
He clearly
purpose.
thought I was
The
senile,
truth is, we
rambling
spend so much
nonsense
time
from a
looking
movie.
outward, we
"Okay,
forget to
sure,
examine what lies
Zulu
within.
X-ray.
That is
Whatever,
where the real
I'll type it
answers
in,
are found.
and then you leave.
Most
Okay."
people live their entire
He tapped the
lives
keys,
bound by
shaking his
limitations
head.
they themselves
He hit
create.
enter. I waited
But true
for
freedom
3
lies
seconds.
elsewhere.
Nothing happened. Then the computer screen in front of him flashed a bright, angry red. A low, pulsing alarm sound began to emit from the terminal, not loud, but insistent. The officer froze. His casual demeanor evaporated. He stared at the screen, his mouth falling open. What is this?" he whispered. "Don't touch the keyboard," I instructed calmly. "Do not attempt to clear the screen. A silent alert has just been sent to the Department of Defense and the regional FBI field office. If you touch that computer again, it will lock down the entire building." The officer looked at me, his face draining of color. The pity was gone. The annoyance was gone. In their place was pure, unadulterated fear. "Who are you?" he stammered, reaching for his radio but stopping himself. "My name is Thomas," I said, leaning against the counter to support my tired legs. "And I suggest you call your chief, immediately. Tell him you have a code black situation in the lobby." Meanwhile, back at the house, Karen was having the time of her life. She had poured herself a large glass of expensive red wine, a bottle I had been saving for a special occasion. Though she didn't care, she turned up the music, drowning out the sound of the thunder. She grabbed her phone and dialed Gary. "He's gone, baby," she shouted into the phone, laughing. "I finally did it. The old leech is out on the street." I can imagine Gary's voice on the other end, slick and greedy, seriously. "You kicked him out in this weather." "He deserves it," Karen said, twirling around the living room. "He's been dragging me down for years. Boring, cheap, useless. Now we have the house to ourselves. You can move your stuff in tomorrow morning." "The house is really ours?" Gary asked. "It's mine," Karen corrected, though she intended to share it. "He never put his name on the deed, remember? He said something about trusts and privacy, but I checked the records years ago. It's held by some anonymous holding company. As his wife, and with him abandoning the property, it's basically mine." She was wrong. She was so incredibly wrong. She didn't understand that the anonymous holding company wasn't a bank. It was a shell corporation run by the government to hide the assets of operatives who didn't technically exist, and by kicking me out, she hadn't just evicted a husband, she had seized a federal safehouse. Karen sat on the sofa, putting her feet up on the coffee table. She looked around the room. She hated the decor. "Too much dark wood, too many books. I'm going to throw all this junk out," she muttered to herself. "I'm going to paint everything white, bright and modern." She took another sip of wine, feeling triumphant. She felt powerful. She had finally taken control of her life. Then, the lights flickered. Karen frowned. "Stupid storm," she grumbled. The lights flickered again, then went out completely. The music cut off. The house was plunged into silence, save for the rain battering the roof. "Great," she sighed, fumbling for her phone to use the flashlight. "Gary, hang on," the power just died, but as she walked toward the window to look at the streetlights, she stopped. The streetlights weren't out. The neighbors' houses still had power. Only our house, her house, was dark and then she heard it. Not thunder, this was a rhythmic, chopping sound, low and heavy, vibrating in her chest. It was coming from above. She went to the front window and peered through the curtains. Her breath hitched in her throat. The street was blocked off. There were no police cars with flashing sirens. Instead, there were 4 massive matte black SUVs parked on the lawn. Men in full tactical gear were moving silently through the rain, surrounding the perimeter. They held rifles, not handguns. They moved with a precision that was terrifying to watch. "Gary," she whispered into the phone, her hand trembling. "Gary, there are men outside." "What? Who?" "I don't know. They look like soldiers." Suddenly, the front door, the same door she had shoved me out of hours ago, exploded inward. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a battering ram. The wood splintered with a deafening crash. Karen screamed and dropped the phone. "Federal agents. Hands where we can see them." The voice was amplified, booming through the house. Beams of blinding white light from tactical flashlights cut through the darkness, sweeping the living room. Karen stood frozen, her hands half-raised, blinded by the lights. "Don't shoot. I live here." 3 men in body armor stormed into the room. They didn't look like local cops. They wore no badges, just patches with symbols she didn't recognize. Clear left, clear right. Target secure. A man in a suit walked in behind them. He wasn't wearing armor, but he looked more dangerous than the men who were. This was Agent Miller, a man I had worked with in Beirut in '89. He was older now, the chief of the regional task force, but he still had the same cold eyes. He looked at Karen with a mixture of confusion and fury. "Who are you?" Miller barked. "I'm Karen." "This is my house," she shrieked, tears streaming down her face. "What is happening?" Miller looked around the room, then tapped his earpiece. "Site is secure, no sign of the asset. I have a civilian female on premises." He walked up to Karen, invading her personal space. "Where is he?" "Who?" Karen sobbed. "Thomas Harrington." "Where is the asset?" The asset." Karen blinked, confused. "You mean Thomas? My husband?" "Where is he?" Miller repeated, his voice low and dangerous. I kicked him out," Karen whispered. He's gone." The silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside. Miller stared at her. The soldiers lowered their weapons slightly, exchanging glances. "You kicked him out?" Miller asked slowly, as if trying to understand a complex equation. "Yes. He's just a broke old man," Karen yelled, trying to regain some shred of authority. "He was mooching off me. I told him to leave." Miller pulled out his phone. His hand was shaking, not from cold, but from adrenaline. He dialed a number.
Look closely
Director.
at the world around you.
"It's Miller.
Everything is
We have
changing,
a situation.
and we must
The
adapt,
asset hasn't been
or risk
compromised
being
by a
left
foreign
behind
entity.
forever.
He
There
was
comes a time when
evicted,
silence
yes,
is no longer
sir,
an option.
by his wife.
We must
She put him
address
on the
the
street.
issues before
Miller
us
listened
with
for a
clarity
moment,
and purpose.
his face
The
pale.
truth is,
He
we
looked
spend
back
so
at
much
Karen,
time looking
"Ma'am," Miller
outward, we
said,
forget to
his
examine
voice
what
trembling
lies
slightly.
within.
"Do you have
That is
any
where
idea
the
who
real
that man
answers are
is?
found.
Do you
Most
have any
people live
idea
their
what you have
entire
just
lives
done?"
bound by limitations
Back at the police
they
station,
themselves create.
the atmosphere had changed
But true
drastically.
freedom lies
I
elsewhere.
was no longer standing
Look
at the counter.
closely at the
I was
world
sitting in
around
the
you.
captain's office,
Everything is
wrapped in a thick
changing,
wool blanket,
and we must
sipping
adapt,
a cup of hot
or
coffee that
risk
the
being
desk
left
sergeant had
behind
brought me
forever.
with trembling hands.
There comes a time
The
when
captain,
silence
a
is
man
no
named
longer an
Henderson,
option.
was pacing
We
back
must
and forth.
address the issues
He had been
before
called
us
in
with
from
clarity
home.
and
He was
purpose.
wearing a
The
raincoat
truth
over his
is,
pajamas.
we spend so much time
Henderson
looking
said,
outward, we
stopping to
forget
look at
to
me,
examine what
"You're telling
lies
me that
within.
for 20 years,
That
we've
is
had
where the real
a
answers
ghost
are found.
living in our
Most
jurisdiction,
people live their
and we
entire
never
lives
knew."
bound by limitations
"That was the
they
point, Captain,"
themselves
I
create.
said calmly.
But
The
true
warmth was
freedom
returning
lies
to my
elsewhere.
limbs. "If you knew, I wasn't doing my job," and the red alert. "The system is designed to trigger if my biometric data hits any law enforcement database," I explained. "It means I've surfaced. It means my cover is blown. It means the safety of my retirement is null and void, because your wife kicked you out," Henderson said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Ex-wife, I suppose," I corrected. The phone on Henderson's desk rang. He picked it up immediately. "Captain Henderson." Yes, sir. "He's right here. He's safe. We have the perimeter locked down. No media." "Understood." He hung up and looked at me. "That was the Pentagon. They're sending a transport for you. But first, They have a team at your house. They need you to authorize entry to the vault. I sighed. The vault. Karen doesn't know about the vault, does she? Henderson asked. Karen doesn't know about the basement underneath the basement, I said. She thinks the house rests on a slab foundation. Well, Henderson said, grabbing his keys. They need you there. They can't breach the containment unit without your retinal scan. If they try to drill it, the fail-safe will incinerate the contents. I stood up, the blanket falling from my shoulders. Then we better go. There are documents in there that could topple 3 governments if they caught fire. Henderson looked at me, wide-eyed. You're serious? I never joke about national security, Captain. The ride back to the house was surreal. I was in the back of a police cruiser, flanked by 2 motorcycle escorts. We sped through the rain, running red lights. When we turned onto my street, I saw the chaos. The neighbors were all on their porches, watching. The black SUVs blocked the driveway. Bright floodlights illuminated the house. It looked like a crime scene. In a way, it was. We pulled up, and Agent Miller opened the car door for me. He looked relieved to see me. Thomas, he said, offering a hand, you look like hell. I feel like it, Miller, I replied, stepping out. How is she? Hysterical, Miller said grimly. We have her detained in the kitchen. She's demanding a lawyer. She's demanding to speak to the manager of the police. She really has no clue, does she? None, I said. I walked up the driveway. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. I walked past the soldiers, who snapped to attention as I passed. It was a reflex for them, seeing a superior officer, even one in soaking wet civilian clothes. I entered the house. The front door was destroyed, hanging off its hinges. I stepped over the debris. Karen was sitting at the kitchen table. A female agent was standing over her. Karen's mascara was running, her face blotchy from crying. When she saw me, her eyes went wide, but instead of relief or apology, she jumped straight to anger. She screamed, standing up, "What did you do? Did you call a SWAT team on me? Are you insane?" "Sit down, Karen," I said quietly. "No. I want you out. I want these people out. This is my house." Agent Miller stepped forward. "Actually, ma'am, that's incorrect." Karen froze. "What?" Miller looked at me for permission. I nodded. "This property," Miller explained, pulling a file from his jacket, "is owned by the Department of Defense. It is a designated Class A safe house for retired Level 5 assets. Mr. Harrington has been allowed to reside here as part of his retirement package.
The world around
the
you.
mortgage payments you thought you were
Everything is
making,
changing.
they
and
were
we
going
must
into
adapt,
a dummy account.
or risk
The house
being
has been
left
paid
behind
for by the
forever.
U.S. government
There
since
comes a time when
1998.
silence is
Karen's
no longer
mouth
an
opened
option.
and closed like a
We
fish.
must address the
But
issues
I
before us
paid.
with clarity
I worked.
and purpose.
You
The
paid
truth
into a
is,
savings
we
account,
spend so much
I
time
said
looking
gently.
outward, we
The
forget
money
to
is still
examine
there,
what lies
Karen.
within.
Every cent
That
you
is where the
contributed to
real
the
answers
mortgage.
are found.
I never
Most
touched
people
it.
live their
It's in
entire
your
lives
name.
bound by
You're not
limitations
broke,
they
but
themselves
you are
create.
homeless. Homeless.
But true freedom
She
lies
whispered.
elsewhere.
You evicted the
Look
primary
closely at the
asset,
world around
Miller
you.
said coldly.
Everything
By
is
doing
changing,
so, you
and we must
violated the
adapt,
occupancy
or
agreement.
risk being
Furthermore,
left
by
behind
exposing
forever.
Mr. Harrington
There
to the
comes a
elements
time
and
when
forcing him to
silence
break
is no
cover,
longer an option.
you have compromised a
We
federal
must
operation.
address the issues
Technically,
before us with
we could
clarity
charge you with
and
treason,
purpose.
Karen
The
gasped,
truth is, we
clutching her
spend so much
chest.
time looking
Treason.
outward, we forget to examine what lies within.
I just wanted my
That
boyfriend
is where the
to
real
move
answers
in.
are found.
I looked at her.
Most people
I
live their
felt a
entire
pang of
lives
sadness.
bound by
Not
limitations
for the
they
relationship.
themselves create.
That was dead.
But
for
true
the sheer
freedom lies
pettiness of it
elsewhere.
all. Where is he? I asked. The boyfriend, he drove by, Karen stammered. He saw the police, he kept driving. He blocked my number, I chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound. Of course he did. Thomas, she pleaded, reaching out for my hand. Thomas, please. Tell them to leave. Tell them it was a mistake. We can fix this. I was stressed. I didn't mean it. I looked at her hand, the hand that had clawed my arm and dragged me to the door. You meant every word, Karen, I said. You called me useless. You called me a burden. I was drunk. You were honest, I corrected. I turned to Miller. I need to access the vault. I need my passport, the hard drives, and the medals. Medals? Karen asked, her voice small. I didn't answer her. I walked to the pantry. I pushed aside the shelves of canned goods, revealing a panel in the wall. I placed my palm on it. then leaned in for the retinal scan. Beep. The wall hissed and slid open, revealing a steel staircase going down. Karen stared into the abyss of the hidden room. What is that? That, I said, is my past. The past you were too busy calling boring to ever ask about. I went down. 10 minutes later, I came back up. I was carrying a small metal briefcase and a wooden box. I was also holding a uniform, an old dress uniform, deep green, heavy with gold braid. I placed the wooden box on the table and opened it. Inside lay the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, and a Purple Heart. Karen stared at the medals. She looked at me, really looked at me. She saw the way the soldiers respected me. She saw the way the police chief deferred to me. And she realized that the nobody she had married was a giant she had failed to see. You're a general? She whispered. Colonel, I corrected. Retired. Special operations. Why didn't you tell me? She cried. Because I wanted to be loved for Thomas, I said, my voice cracking slightly. Not for the rank. Not for the clearance level. Just for me. And you proved tonight that Thomas wasn't enough for you. I closed the box. Agent Miller, I said, I'm ready for transport. Where are we taking you, Colonel? Miller asked. We have a secure facility in Virginia ready. Golf course, full medical, staff, that sounds perfect, I said. I'm tired of the rain. I turned to leave. Thomas. Karen screamed, running toward me. The female agent stepped in her way, blocking her path firmly. Thomas, you can't leave me here. Where am I supposed to go? I stopped at the door. The broken door. I looked back at her one last time. The house was cold now, wind blowing through the shattered frame. You have your freedom, Karen, I said. You have your wine, and you have the money in your savings account. I suggest you use it to find a hotel. The government forensics team will be here in an hour to strip this house to the studs. You have 60 minutes to pack your things. But it's raining. She wailed. I looked out at the storm. It was still pouring. I know, I said softly. It's cold out there. Dress warm. I walked out into the night. This time, I didn't walk alone. I was flanked by 4 agents. An armored limousine was waiting. The back door held open for me. The interior was warm, smelling of leather. As I climbed in, I saw a car slow down across the street. It was Gary's beat-up sedan. He was peering out the window, looking terrified at the military presence. He locked eyes with me for a second. I simply nodded at him. He slammed on the gas and peeled away, tires screeching, leaving Karen behind. I sat back in the seat as the convoy began to move. I was 70 years old. I was single. I was homeless in the technical sense. But for the first time in years, I felt respected. The boring old man was dead. The colonel was back. As we drove away, leaving the house and Karen shrinking in the rearview mirror, I picked up the satellite phone Miller had handed me. This is Harrington, I said into the line. Status. Active. The voice on the other end was warm and welcoming. Welcome back to the fold, sir. We've missed you. I looked out the window at the rain streaking the glass. It wasn't a storm anymore. It was just weather, and I was finally dry. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity, a stark contrast to the slow, quiet life I had led with Karen. I was transported to a facility that looked more like a 5-star resort than a government installation. It was tucked away in the mountains of Virginia, surrounded by thousands of acres of forest. The security was invisible but impenetrable. For the first few days, I just slept. I slept in a bed that was softer than anything I had owned in decades. I ate meals prepared by a chef who knew exactly how I liked my steak. I walked in gardens that were manicured to perfection, though I found myself itching to get my hands in the dirt and fix the hydrangeas myself. But the silence was different here. It wasn't the lonely silence of my marriage. It was a peaceful silence. On my 4th day of freedom, the silence of the mountains was finally beginning to drown out the memory of the storm. I sat on the terrace of the West Wing, a cup of Earl Grey steaming beside me, losing myself in Thucydides' history of the Peloponnesian War. It was ironic reading about ancient conflicts while hidden in a facility designed for veterans of modern ones.
There comes a time when silence is no longer
smelling
an
of pine
option.
and expensive
We
landscaping.
must address
For the
the
first time
issues
in
before
15
us
years,
with clarity
I wasn't
and
waiting for a
purpose.
shouted
The
insult
truth
or a
is,
door
we
to
spend
slam.
so much time
I was
looking
just
outward,
breathing.
we forget
The
to
sound of
examine what
sensible
lies
heels
within.
clicking against the slate
That is
patio
where the
broke
real
my
answers are
concentration.
found.
A
Most
young
people
woman in a
live their
severe
entire
charcoal
lives
suit
bound
stood
by
over me.
limitations
She
they
was new,
themselves create.
probably an analyst
But
rotating
true
in from
freedom
Langley,
lies
and
elsewhere.
she looked nervous.
Look closely at the
Colonel
world around you.
Harrington. She
Everything is
asked, her
changing,
voice tight.
and we must
Just
adapt
Thomas, please,
or
I
risk
said,
being left
marking my
behind
page
forever.
with a heavy sigh.
There comes a
I'm
time when
retired,
silence is no
remember.
longer an option.
Apologies,
We
sir.
must address the
But
issues
there's
before
someone
us
here to
with
see you,
clarity
Thomas.
and purpose.
We
The
intercepted
truth
her
is,
at the main
we spend
perimeter
so
gate
much time
about 10
looking
minutes
outward,
ago.
we forget
She
to
claims to
examine
be
what
your
lies
wife.
within.
I felt a cold
That is
knot
where the
tighten in
real
my
answers
stomach.
are found.
The peace of the
Most
morning
people live their
evaporated.
entire lives
Ex-wife,
bound by
I
limitations
corrected,
they
my
themselves
gaze
create.
drifting back to the tree line.
But true
The
freedom
divorce
lies
papers were
elsewhere.
filed by your legal team yesterday, weren't they? Expedited, sealed, and signed by a federal judge, the woman confirmed, checking a tablet in her hand. Technically, she has no standing. The guards are ready to escort her off the property. But she's insisting on speaking with you. She claims it's an emergency. I looked out at the rolling peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains. I could have refused. One word from me, and Karen would be removed from the premises as efficiently as a bag of trash. I could go back to my book and never hear her voice again. But a part of me, the part that had foolishly loved her, or perhaps the part that simply needed to verify that the monster was truly defanged, needed closure. I needed final, absolute closure. Bring her to the visitor center, I said, closing my book with a finality that echoed in the quiet air. Not the main house. I don't want her near my quarters. Use the secure meeting room in Sector B. 20 minutes later, I walked through the heavy, soundproof doors of the secure wing. The room was divided by a pane of ballistic glass 3 inches thick. It wasn't a prison visiting room, exactly. The chairs were high-end and the lighting was soft, but the intent was the same: separation. It was a room designed for debriefings, sterile and cold. Karen was waiting on the other side. The transformation was shocking. The arrogant woman who had sneered at me in her designer jeans was gone. In her place sat a trembling figure. Her hair was unwashed and messy. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. She was wearing a mismatched tracksuit that looked like it had been pulled from a suitcase in the dark. She looked small and defeated. When our eyes met through the glass, her face crumbled. She burst into tears, her hands slamming against the partition. Thomas. Oh, thank God. Thomas, you have to help me. I sat down calmly. I didn't pick up the phone handset. The room had microphones. I could hear her perfectly through the speakers. What do you want, Karen? They took everything, she sobbed. The house, they boarded it up. They gave me an hour, Thomas. An hour. I had to leave my mother's china. I had to leave the furniture. You said you wanted to throw it all out anyway, I reminded her. You said you wanted to paint everything white. She flinched. I was angry. I didn't mean it. Thomas, I'm staying in a Motel 6 by the highway. It's disgusting. There are bugs. And Gary. Gary won't answer my calls. Gary was never interested in you, Karen, I said, my voice even. He was interested in the house. He was interested in the free ride. Once the ride stopped, he got off. I know that now, she cried, pressing her hand against the glass. I know I was stupid. But we were married for 15 years. Doesn't that mean anything? Can't you get me into this place? I looked it up. Well, I couldn't find it on a map, but the GPS brought me here. It looks like a palace. We could live here together. Like a fresh start. I stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. Karen, I said slowly, do you remember the night of the storm? Yes, and I'm sorry. Please, Thomas, listen to me. Karen's voice cracked, reverberating against the cold steel walls of the secure visitation room. She reached across the table, desperate to grab my hand, but I kept my fingers interlaced in my lap. Do you remember what you said? I asked quietly. It wasn't just anger, Karen. You looked me in the eye. You said I was draining your resources. You said I was a useless old man. I took it back, she sobbed, tears ruining her makeup. I didn't mean it. You can't take back betrayal, I said, my voice steady. This facility isn't a retirement home for wayward spouses. It's a sanctuary for people who served their country in the shadows. People who sacrificed everything. You didn't sacrifice, Karen. You consumed. Her face hardened, the mask of sorrow slipping to reveal the ugliness underneath. So you're just going to leave me? She screamed, her voice becoming shrill. After everything I did for you? I cooked your meals. I washed your clothes. I gave you the best years of my life. And I paid for everything, I countered, my voice icy. The luxury car you drove here. The clothes on your back. The vintage wine you drank while you kicked me out. In return, I asked for loyalty. Just loyalty. And when the rain came, you locked the door and turned off the lights. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the concrete floor. Thomas, wait. You can't do this. The lawyers have contacted you, I said, buttoning my jacket. You have the savings account. It's about $40,000.
Look closely at the world around you.
That's more than enough to start
Everything
over.
is changing,
But you will
and
not
we
do
must
it
adapt
here.
or
And
risk
you will not
being
do
left
it
behind
with me.
forever.
Panic
There comes a
seized her.
time when silence is no longer an option.
She shrieked,
We must
slamming her
address
fist
the
on the
issues
table.
before us with
I'll
clarity
go to the
and
press.
purpose.
The
I'll
truth
tell
is,
everyone
we
who
spend
you
so much
really
time
are.
looking outward, we
I'll
forget
sell
to
your
examine what
secrets.
lies within.
I stopped at the
That
heavy
is where the
security
real
door
answers
and
are
looked back.
found.
The
Most
young
people
woman in the
live their
charcoal
entire
suit,
lives
who had been
bound by
standing
limitations
silently
they
in the corner like a
themselves
statue,
create.
stepped forward.
But true freedom
Mrs.
lies
Harrington,
elsewhere.
the agent
Look
said
closely at the
pleasantly,
world around
though
you.
her eyes were dangerous.
Everything is changing,
I should
and we
inform you
must
that you
adapt
signed a
or risk
non-disclosure
being
agreement
left
when you
behind
married
forever.
Thomas.
There
You
comes a
might not
time when
remember it.
silence
It
is
was
no
part of the
longer an
marriage
option.
license paperwork,
We must
page
address
14,
the issues before
paragraph
us with
C.
clarity
Any
and
attempt to
purpose.
reveal
The
Thomas's
truth is,
identity
we
or
spend
location
so much
will
time
result
looking
in
outward,
immediate
we
federal
forget to examine
incarceration
what
for
lies
violation
within.
of the Espionage
That
Act.
is where the real
We're
answers
talking
are
20
found.
years in a
Most
federal
people live
prison.
their entire lives
Without
bound
wine.
by limitations
Karen
they
turned
themselves
pale.
create.
Her mouth
But
clamped
true
shut,
freedom
the
lies
threat of
elsewhere.
prison silencing her greed. I looked at her one last time. The woman I had loved was gone. In her place was a stranger who had mistaken kindness for weakness. "Goodbye, Karen," I said. I walked out of the room. I didn't look back. As I stepped out into the sunshine of the Virginia mountains, I took a deep breath. The air was crisp and clean, scrubbing away the stale scent of her perfume. I walked down the stone path to the garden. The head groundskeeper, an old man named Sal who had served in Vietnam, was kneeling by a bed of roses. "Morning, Colonel," Sal grunted, wiping sweat from his brow. "These hybrid teas are giving me trouble." Black spot. I knelt down beside him, ignoring the creak in my knees. I touched the leaves of the rose bush. "You need to prune the infected leaves, Sal," I said softly. "Cut them away so the rest of the plant can survive." Sal looked at me and smiled. "You know your roses, Colonel." "I know that sometimes," I said, looking toward the gate where Karen's car was being escorted away, "you have to cut off the dead weight to let the new growth bloom." I picked up the shears. "Let me help you with that," I said. And for the first time in a long time, I got to work. Not hiding. Not waiting. Just living. The useless old man was gone. Thomas Harrington was finally home.
Hello guys, I'm the creator of this channel. If you like the video, please hit the like and subscribe to the channel.